All right, ladies and gents, children of all ages, if you can hear this, it means only one thing. That is right, folks. It means that Lecture 2 is now in the books and ready to go. Exciting times, guys, exciting times. So, lecture number 2, I thought went fairly well. There's a lot of little things and a lot of topics that are going to set you up really nicely for the next couple of weeks. And I think for the first time in lecture, maybe you're getting a sense of how explicit in nature the lectures are going to be. That's because anything that we cover in this lecture, and probably for most lectures hereafter, again, are going to be very much directly related and correlated to your research project. The picture, gotta do the picture, right? Actually, this picture, I know exactly where it was. This is in a national park called the Grand Tetons. And the lake that we are gracefully gliding across is Lake Jenny, or Jenny Lake. My only regret about this picture is that giant yellow banana hanging off our canoe. It would have been such an Instagram-worthy picture, but with it on, I don't know. I don't know if it even bears to be posted. Anyway, sit back, relax, enjoy lecture number 2, and I will get back with you in lecture number 3 sooner rather than later. Bye, everybody. All right, good folks. Let's launch this class like an Angry Bird. Remember that game? Angry Bird. That was a good game. I'm pretty sure that was like the first app that fully addicted probably all of my kids. So, as we launch this class here, what did you get from your 30 minutes of reading? That's right, it was in the slide of clarity. 30 minutes, one thing that you did not know but you now know. How about one thing that you were confused about? How did that work out? Undoubtedly, I wish that I could actually listen to your answers, because I do enjoy talking to my students instead of just talking to my computer. But those are the questions I would have asked you if we were live and in person. But we are not, so give it some thought. If you do have some sort of confusion or you're not sure about something, always remember, I am an email away, davidperez11230 at AOL.com. How about my textbook? Anybody have a chance to kind of open that up and leaf through it? I would love to get some feedback on that. Let's take a look at what we're doing tonight. Because it is a busy night here in 7657. I don't even know if that's our number or not, but sounds good to me. First off, we gotta start working on these research questions here a little bit. Unlike most people, I use the research questions a little bit different, and I like to get into that part of your research, because it really begins to bring things into focus. At least I hope it does. The next bullet point is something very, very practical, but something that is going to help us in actually lecture number 3. And that is, we're going to be developing a set of keywords and phrases that are eventually going to help us with our EBSCO and ProQuest searches. That is where you're going to be doing your review of literature. So definitely something to keep in tune to. And then the big one for tonight is going to be how to write 2 properly formatted hypotheses. You absolutely have to have a hypothesis in order to perform action research. So that's going to be the primary goal for tonight. And then we are going to end the evening with a format for section number 1. And for those of you that didn't have a chance to listen to lecture number 1, you'll know that section number 1 is actually your first assignment, which is due in the next coming weeks. So you're going to get a very detailed format of what that's going to look like. This will also be the first time that you get it, and then next week we'll do it one more time just to make sure that it's nice and clear for you, and then we'll move forward with that. So that is what's on tap for tonight. All right, folks, let's get some slides in before the afternoon gets too late here. Jumping into the deep end of the pool with some research questions. Here we go. For this particular model, I like to take somewhat of a top-down approach, meaning that on this slide, I want you to see kind of like the finished product, and then we'll get into some of the components on the next several slides, but I want you to see the whole thing first here. So this is what we have on until now. We have that topic that we started last week and we built upon last week when we wrote our problem statements. In this case, my problem statement is students with disabilities have a difficult time engaging with written content and having adequate stamina when reading independently. So this is a new part, the research questions here. Watch this. Can the speed of reading be increased by, and please note that the word by is in red and underlined, and you'll see why in just a second, be increased by using different forms of lighting in the classroom. I like that. I like the fact that that question now opens up my thinking to different forms of lighting in the classroom. Look at the next one. Will students with impaired eyesight see academic gains by, there's the word again, adjusting individual lighting needs? So with this question, instead of focusing on different lighting forms, now I'm thinking that maybe individual lighting needs is kind of the way I want to express my outcomes. You see how it begins to help you think differently about that original topic? Let's get to some of the bits and pieces here. So these two are kind of low-key, really important slides in this entire process here. So let's kind of go one by one. First off, research questions are basically an inquiry process, as opposed to, like we spoke about last week, that the inquiry process begins before the problem statement. Well, in this case, it happens to be that the inquiries that are being made after the problem statement has already been developed. In that sense, your research questions very much do begin to move your research ideas in a very specific and very particular direction. Along those lines, as you begin to move or make your choices about which research questions you want to explore versus which ones you don't, in many ways, your research questions are going to have a variety of different aspects within your topic. And that's the exploration that is going to be a part of, creating these research questions. To some degree, if you look at the bottom there, they're a free-form exercise. It's almost like a bit of a brainstorm activity. I would like to make the distinction in bullet point number 1, 2, 3, 4. The first red, 4 down. 5 down. Not all research questions need to be answered. That might also be a deviation from what you've heard in the past, where if you write down a research question, then you must answer it in your research, and that's not necessarily true for us here in action research. When it comes to hypotheses, absolutely 100%. If you put down a hypothesis, and you'll be responsible for 2 of them. We'll get to that in just a little while. Those have to be proven or disproven. But as far as your research questions, they're simply a way to get different ideas out there. Now go back to my model in the last slide. You saw how the first research question and the second research question were similar in a way, but very much different in the sense that they had very different outcomes to the questions that were being proposed. Last bullet point for me here is that middle one, begin to highlight a topic specific vocabulary. What I've noticed over the years is that all parts of the educational world, whether it's different contents and different disciplines, they all have their little content specific vocabulary. So as you write down your research questions, by all means, you should already begin to sound like an authority figure with what it is that you're writing. The reason for that is that as you begin to highlight these topic-specific vocabulary words and you begin to use them, we'll use them again actually in the next lecture when we start heading towards and looking at the literature review. I have one more slide on characteristics. Here it is. As it turns out, that slide was just a bit redundant, so in the spirit of economical lecturing, I got rid of it. There are two basic ways that you could come up with a research question. It's kind of interesting here. You have two kinds of reasoning that lead to a research question. You have deductive reasoning and inductive reasoning. So let's start with the deductive part. The deductive part is based off an assumption. It most likely should be a logical assumption or something that kind of makes sense to you as a researcher. But as you have that premise and as you kind of sift through your assumptions, you begin to ask questions based on those assumptions. You're basically deducing a question from your personal theory. The other side to that is not deductive, but inductive. And inductive reasoning is based more on something that you've seen, something that you've experienced, something that you've very much have been a part of. Personally, I like the inductive part better because I feel that if I've seen it once or I've seen it twice or it's something that is a part of my everyday professional world, I more likely have a connection and somewhat of a passion to answer that question. For this particular research, though, both sides, meaning both ways of thinking about your research questions, are very valid. So if you have those assumptions or if you have those observations, by all means, they are good sources for your research questions. So as we follow this top-down model here, we're going to get to the most basic components of the research question, and that is a particular format that I happen to very much like for your research question. This format, please, is not a suggested format. When you do write your research questions, I would like to have it in this form, and there's a reason for it. I'll show you now in a second why. Let's start with the top there. First off, you have a particular direction that you would like your research question to go in. So it's either going to be phrased in the positive or the negative form. Think about it like this for bullet point number 1. If you have a off-task behavior that you wish to, yeah, that's right, decrease, that's a negative. If you have an on-task behavior, if you have something good that happens, well, that direction of the question is now going to be, yes, an increase. You want to increase that. That is the direction that the format is referring to. So you start off with a particular direction. Then you have the big 3 in the second bullet point: an academic, a behavior, or an attitude. So think about it like this. Anything that you do with your class or your students, more often than not, the vast majority of the time, hopes to impact one of those 3 things. Either you want to do something academically, you want to give them information, which is what most of us do for a living. Some of us say, well, you know what, this particular lesson or this particular moment of teaching, I want to now impact a behavior. Whatever that behavior may be, it could be a good behavior or a negative behavior, like my model up above. Finally, one of the last things that teachers hope to impact is a particular attitude or the way that students feel about something. So, recap quickly: direction, one way or another, positive or negative, then a particular academic skill, behavior, or an attitude, and then the word by. Has to have the word by. Okay? And then finally, your topic or the aspect of your topic that you're thinking about covering. So, let's take a look at what that looks like again as a completed piece. All right, you have a good idea of what the actual model looks like. This one looks a little bit different, and the reason is because the intention is different in this slide. With this particular set of research questions and the problem statement that it is attached to, is to show you the exploration nature, the brainstorm nature of this process. If you look at each one of those research questions, I'm not going to go through each one of them. I'll let you read them at your leisure. If you look at anything after the word by, right? By. There you go. Anything after the word by. Notice how each one of those little pieces of information are now beginning to show you the practical side of your research. So, by providing yellow and diminished lighting, in a way, when you look at it, that's a different way of solving that problem statement. Look at the second one, providing alternative lighting, a different solution. And then third one, alternative lighting section, is still another solution. Each time I write a research question, each time I make an inquiry, what I'm essentially doing after the word by is proposing some sort of solution. I said it before, but I'll say it again. It's not that your research is going to explore all these solutions because, well, frankly, that's impossible. We wouldn't have enough time in this semester to go through each one of these. But as you begin to mature your research process and you begin to read about your topic, you could very well find out that, towards the end of section 1, you kind of go back look at your research questions and say, you know what, research question 1 really has there's a strong level of attachment that I have as a researcher to that. But number 3, you know what, zero engagement there. So you've given yourself the choices that you need in order to move forward, as long as you follow that format and you make sure that anything after the word by is a possible solution to your statement. So just to be as explicit as I can with what the word by is going to do for us as researchers, I have two kind of little statements. I have two little statements and then one last example there, and then we'll move on. So yeah, anything after the word by is basically the area that you're going to be working to fix to some degree. And what I mean by working to fix, I mean that you're going to eventually come up with practical solutions to those problems, but what you're actually fixing is after the word by. Phrased a little bit differently, but pretty much saying the same thing with the second bullet point. The practical aspect of your research, are in many ways kind of dictated to you with the words that come after the word by. So it's almost like your what it is that you're choosing to write about going forward are very much linked and welded to the words after by. Just to take a look at this one last time here. Will students with impaired eyesight see academic gains by adjusting individual lighting needs? So, individual lighting needs. I'm thinking about differentiated lighting. I'm thinking about IEP goals. I'm thinking practically about maybe setting up like a lamp, so I can get some kind of like yellow light and more comfortable lighting instead of fluorescent light. Maybe I could put some bead bags there, to change the room design a little bit. Okay, so you see, I'm thinking along the lines, but I need to adjust the individual lighting needs. That's what eventually needs to happen, and that's what your writing will be for a good part of your thesis. This looks like the perfect time for a try it now slide. So let's do one right now. The ultimate goal is going to be to produce about 5 to 7 research questions, and more is better here. There are parts in your research where I would say less is more. In this case, more is more, because the further that you can amplify your ideas and express those ideas, the easier your writing will be. With that in mind, it is a cut and paste activity, meaning that whatever you do now during this little try it now session, you're actually going to be cutting and pasting it right into your research thesis. So don't think that whatever you do now is going to be just kind of like a brainstorm and then you're going to throw away that brainstorm. You're actually going to take whatever you do during the try it now and cut and paste it right into your document. More about that in a couple slides when we talk about the format for section 1, which we will be doing tonight. Also, the research questions very much become a centerpiece for the next lecture as we begin building towards the literature review. So you can kind of begin to see the importance of taking care of this. There's no better time to do it than right now. For those of you that took advantage during the last lecture, hopefully you saw the value in doing your work as we go through the lecture. So feel free to continue that right now. I have one more little tiny segment for research questions, and once you've written them, hopefully, and then we will call it a wrap, and I will call it a night. Well, hopefully you have some viable research questions for us to evaluate, because I have one slide on it right now. This set of questions is designed to find out whether your research questions are going to work for you or are they going to leave you flat by the side of the road. As you begin to put your research questions into paper, if you haven't done so already, ask yourself some of these questions. Then look after the word by and see if they kind of mesh with what the question is asking. Those last two questions at the very, very bottom that are in red are the ones that are usually most important to me as an evaluator of your work. It's usually where things kind of fall apart, so I kind of like to leave them in red. And just to take the last one as an example, after you read whatever comes after your word by, is there something testable in those words that you could actually do at some point in the next couple of weeks and months? If the answer is yes, and the answer is yes to a lot of those other questions, and you know what, chances are it's a good, viable research question that you can use. If you read after the word by and you're seeing that there's very little that you could really test in your classroom, or look at the first red, anything after the word by is outside of the scope of what you're able to accomplish as a teacher and as a researcher for this class. I don't know, that research question is probably not for you. Now, you don't have to get rid of it. You don't have to delete it. But you know for yourself that going forward, that's probably not one of the research questions that you're going to be focused on in your subsequent writing. All right, folks, I am going to call that a wrap for this evening. A little teachable moment. How about this? I was well on my way to the couch and to watch some quality YouTube programming, and I said, you know what? I could do about 40 minutes. Let me get some slides in, and lo and behold, I did about 12 slides. So you know what, Perez? That's right. Pat on the back. You sparkling, fresh, new day. Nothing like a nice fall afternoon to liven the spirits here a little bit. I was listening to the last slide, and maybe it's a little bit of a teachable moment for us because, to be honest, I mean, the same way that I don't want to sit here and lecture to my computer, you're not going to want to sit there and write, what it is that the course requires you to write. So we're all kind of doing stuff that wouldn't be our default activity for a nice afternoon. But the teachable moment is that, kind of like the same way that I sat down and I plugged away, and it was only 12 slides that I did the other night, but it made me feel like, okay, fine, you know what, 12 slides, it'll get done. Well, the same thing for you. you know what, a paragraph here, a paragraph there, 3, 4 paragraphs, maybe even a page or two, and you'll be surprised how quickly things will move along for you. So that is the end of my public service announcement, which for you will be right in the middle of of a lecture. But hey, you know what? We're going to roll with it. We are going to start with keywords and phrases, which are going to be instrumental in the next lecture. Here we go. As we begin to look at some of the different ways that we're going to be writing, not just section number 1, but section 2 and 3 eventually. One of the things that you're going to notice is that once you've had the ability to spend some time, and I don't love the word, but I hear it used a lot. Once you've had time to marinate on your research ideas, you'll find that a lot of times there's a very specific set of words and phrases. There's particular language that's used as part of anything, but in this case, your particular research topic. So that's what we're going to explore in the next couple of slides. Another reason why I like going into this little part of the lecture is because a lot of times students, especially new researchers, which I'm sure most of you are, have that want and that need to write with some sort of authority, and as well you should. You are going to become somewhat of an authority on your particular research topic. But they feel that in order to be that authority, they need to have very lengthy prose. They need to reinvent that English language, paragraphs on steroids, sentences that kind of take up a whole paragraph. Instead of making yourself sound like an authority figure by using more complex sentence and paragraph structure, the key words and phrases are in many ways what give writing an authority type of feel to it. It's almost like you're able to master the language around that topic, and then when you write with that language, by definition, you kind of have that authority to your words. So how do we accomplish this? Well, I'm going to send you to a place called Google Scholars. And I happen to like Google Scholars a lot because it's a nice place to begin reading and doing some light searches in order to find some of that terminology and some of those words that will give your writing the power and authority that you're looking for. For those of you that have never come across Google Scholars, essentially it's Google for research articles. If you go into just regular Google, just plain Google, and you type in the word scholars there, it'll take you to a different type of search engine. I'll give you a quick example. If you look at bullet point number 3 there, and then the proper lighting for teaching, that was the original model from lecture number 2. When I typed in proper lighting for teaching, one of the things that came up right in that first page by opening up, I would say maybe 2 or 3 articles, and not even spending all that much time, but just kind of like reading through a little bit and skimming through, I found those 3 things which later impacted my searches for the articles that I really did want to use as part of my literature review. The 3 were the physiological need. Like, I didn't realize that lighting had to do with the body and had to do with a physiological need. I know it makes sense now that we're talking about it, but at the time it hadn't really entered my thinking. Dimmable lighting in special education. I was like, hey, you know what? So maybe it doesn't have to be yellow light. Maybe it could be light that's dimmed down a little bit. And then the idea behind flicker light and pure wave. Flicker light is flicker light is a type of light that fluorescent lighting uses, and pure wave is the yellow light, or some LCD light bulbs have pure wave. All these things I never really learned about. I didn't know about it before I started looking through Google Scholars a little bit. If I drop any one of those three things into my writing, it's going to sound like I know what I'm talking about. And that's kind of the idea. We're kind of building the vocabulary for yourself, not just so that you could use it later on in your searches on EBSCO and ProQuest, which we'll model in just a little while, but also to make it a part of your writing. Let's move on here a second. So I'm going to jump right into a try it now. I know that was kind of a short little set, but I am trying to become a little more economical and efficient with the number of slides that I'm going through. I'm trying to be cognizant of the time that I'm lecturing. But anyway, I think it kind of says what it needs to say. So for the next part, for the try it now, I'd like for you to go into Google Scholars or even regular Google. It doesn't have to be necessarily Google Scholars. I'd like it because I think it's interesting, but I'd like for you to find 4 to 5 keywords or phrases here. And when we did the research questions in lecture 2, I told you more is more and try to aim for a higher number. I'm looking for the opposite here. I'm looking for quality, meaning that words and phrases that you really think, hone in and key in on what it is that your topic and your research is trying to say. So that's the first part of the try it now. The second part of the try it now is that you've had a chance to read and you've had a chance to kind of read through and get some of those keywords for yourself and key phrases for yourself together. Can you construct or reconstruct 2 research questions, 2 to 3 new research questions using those keywords and phrases? What I'm actually hoping that happens here is that you go back into your research questions from lecture 2 and now begin to add, quote unquote, that authority language into your research questions. If you use these keywords and phrases kind of over and over again, you'll see how you kind of get into like a little rhythm of using it, and it kind of follows you through section 2 and 3, and you begin to use them kind of throughout your thesis. For the last little piece, whatever keywords and phrases that you do use now and whatever new research questions you do come up with, we are going to be using it when I demo the finding articles online. So not wasted effort, definitely going to be used here. We're going to make the transition here from those keywords and phrases, and hopefully you have had some success with the try it now. But we're going to transition into developing a good pair of hypotheses that in many ways are going to work for you, and in every way will be a lens for your future writing. This slide very much is a byproduct of doing this sequence kind of over and over again. I don't know if I mentioned it in the first two lectures, but this is, I believe, my 32nd or maybe 33rd time of teaching the course. So this lecture is very much a byproduct of those dozens of times running through this. It's at this point where we begin to look towards the hypotheses and begin to kind of wrap up phase 1 of your research, where researchers often kind of like look at it and say, I don't know, Perez, this is pretty fuzzy. I'm not really sure I know exactly where I'm going or what I'm doing with it, and that's okay. It's supposed to be fuzzy. You've only had 3 lectures, or maybe two and a bit on this topic, so it's supposed to be a little bit fuzzy. In order to help clarify things, and very much that's the point of the next X amount of slides, is to begin to look at these hypotheses as a way to define what it is that you're hoping to measure, what it is that you're looking to solve within your classroom. We're going to be doing that by defining a variable. Now, we've all heard of what variables are, but let's get really specific and begin to understand how these variables are going to work for us. I'm almost sure that you've heard of these two types of variables before, but I find that a lot of times new researchers or young researchers have a hard time identifying which one is which. So let's go through them real quick. The ones that we're going to be looking at over the next couple slides are going to be your independent variable and your dependent variable. So let's look at independent variable first. What I did in the green box on the left hand column is I found 3 different definitions for an independent variable. It doesn't matter which one you choose, or if you choose a combination of them in order to help you understand how it's going to kind of work for you. So let's take a look at the first one. An IV, and by the way, that's usually what I call an independent variable. I just go straight to the acronym. An IV is the treatment which is given to one group. Think about that. The treatment, something that you're giving to one group within your research sample. Let's try another one. An IV is the solution to the statement of the problem. You know what the statement of the problem is. You came up with it 2 lectures ago. What's the solution that you came up with? If the solution doesn't present itself right away, that's okay, because the IV and the development of the IV is going to come up with the solution for you. I don't want to get too far into that. Let's go look at the third one. The one factor that is different from one testing group, to the next. So between those three definitions, choose one that kind of works for you. I found over the years that the middle one works for most people, but the other 2 do pitch in some bits of information that don't necessarily appear in the second one. So let's do a quick example here. Students are having a hard time relaxing while reading a test passage. Okay, fine. So that's the statement of the problem. Go to the left real quick. What is the treatment for that problem? Number 2, what is the solution for that problem? Number 3, what's different? What am I going to make different from one group to another group? Well, let's take a look. Would students' test anxiety be reduced by changing the lighting? What's the IV in that? Where's the IV there? Let's take a look. I hope that shows up on the video. It should. There it is. The lighting is the one variable that we are testing. If I look at it, the lighting is going to be the solution that I've chosen in order to fix that problem statement. Start thinking now. Start thinking. How are you going to fix your problem? What are you going to institute in your classroom that's going to fix this problem that you've created? Before we change slides, you see the word by, right? We did that last week or last lecture, or in the first lecture. I'm not sure which one there anymore. Anything after the word by, chances are, is going to be your independent variable. It's in these slides that I wish I had you in front of me, because I want to make sure that you understand it, but I think that you do. I'm on your team. I got it. Okay, here we go. Let's move on to the dependent variable. So a DV is a little bit different. I only have 2 definitions because it's a little more clear-cut than the IV. So the DV is the result which is measured, or you could look at it and say the criterion by which you measure the effect of the IV. Now, I know that second one sounds a little more complicated, but all it's trying to say is that as you measure the results that you're actually trying to measure are what did your solution, what did your treatment, what did your IV do for the students in your classroom. Let's get a couple of quick examples here. To measure the effect of the lighting, I will measure. Well, let me think. How am I going to measure whether the lighting worked or not? Oh, well, I can measure test anxiety. I can measure test scores. I can measure test speed. I could probably measure 150 different things, and all of them will tell me whether my alternative lighting worked or didn't work. As a side note, if you'll notice in the IV slide, there was only one IV, and it very much was welded with lighting and everything associated with lighting. There was one IV. But when it comes to dependent variable, I have multiple opportunities to measure whether that lighting worked or didn't work. I'll leave it there. Let's go to the next slide. So let's talk about how those two ideas, the IV and the DV, are applicable to your particular research. So first off, the IV and the DV were much more critical and central to the research when we were collecting data from the students. Now, obviously, for this particular semester, that's not going to apply. So we're not going to necessarily use the IV and the DV as focal points, but instead they're going to be a part of your hypotheses. And once we put them in your hypotheses, it almost creates like a stepping stone into that next stage, which is called your thesis statement. Now, we haven't gotten there yet because your thesis statement is going to be located at the very beginning of section 2, and your hypothesis I'm going to lecture on. I'm going to continue lecturing on in the next couple of slides. For now, those two hypotheses that we are creating using the IV and the DV are going to be translated into two thesis statements. You may find that as we go through the try it nows and this particular set that you have two perfect hypotheses, but for the most part, a lot of researchers tend to write hypotheses early in the process, and then as they start reading more in the literature reviews and they start writing about different articles and they get more ideas, the hypothesis starts to change a little bit, and there starts to be more of a sensitivity towards what the hypothesis is trying to say, and kind of a exclusion to ideas that maybe don't belong in the hypothesis. So that all is going to come into play as you move forward with the process of section 1. Good. You have some ideas, you have some information that you can kind of ponder. Let's get very practical, though. Let's talk about how we're going to take those research questions from last lecture and turn them into well-formatted hypotheses. 2 of them. 2. Since we're talking about practical, let's start with Webster's definition of a hypothesis. An unproven statement which the researcher, that would be you, will either prove or reject. By the way, that is the right terminology. So when you talk about a hypothesis or 2 hypotheses, you either prove that hypothesis or you reject it. Couple of characteristics of a good hypothesis to get your thinking to that next step here. First off, it's written in the declarative form, meaning that it is not a question. It is a statement. It is a sentence. Typically it's written in one sentence, and we are going to use that format for our class, meaning that it's going to be brief, to the point, but it's going to be written in a single sentence. There has to be a very direct connection to your research questions. The reason is because your research questions are welded in your problem statement. If you stray too far from your research questions when you're creating and designing your hypotheses, it means that your hypotheses have also strayed from your problem statement. If you keep everything in line and you use one to form the other, and that goes for the thesis statement too, which is coming up. If you use one for the other, it's impossible it's impossible to get lost. So we're very much going to have that direct connection from your research questions right into your hypothesis. The fourth one usually is not a problem, but I like to mention it, and that is that your hypothesis can't just be pulled out of thin air. It has to have some sort of theory and body of knowledge to it. Your literature review will take you part of the way there, as far as developing that body of knowledge. But in the back of your mind, as you're writing it, just know that you really shouldn't be kind of not making stuff up, but saying things that seem to make sense, but don't have a theory or a body of knowledge attached to it. Don't think it'll be a problem, because the review of literature will kind of take care of that for you. Let me ask you a question. What is the treatment that you're proposing in order to solve the problem statement that you originally created in lecture number 1, I believe? Hit pause for a second. Come up with anything. It doesn't matter what it is. Any concept, any type of treatment, give it a shot. I'm going to get some coffee. I'll be right back. Probably a bad idea. I am definitely over caffeinated and undernourished. So if in the next couple of slides I start talking like I'm auctioning off something, you'll know why. Good. So you have that fuzzy kind of idea. You have something that you're thinking about that's going to solve the original problem. That, in essence, is really the beginning of a successful hypothesis. If you don't have that original concept that you're going to put forward, if you don't have that original treatment that you're going to propose, it's going to be kind of hard to completely formulate a true hypothesis. It doesn't necessarily have to stay the same as it is right now, but as long as you have that treatment that you hope to eventually institute, it's almost like it's easier to modify and change as opposed to come up with this idea later on down the road. It's one of those times where you can't necessarily kick the can down the road. It's better just to pick up that can right now, and you could always switch it up and change it and work at it through the course of the next couple of next couple of lectures. But for now, take that concept, kind of tuck it away, and let's go forward. In the first couple of lectures, I brought up the concept of academics, behavior, and attitude. I don't know if I said it at the time, but I'll say it now. There's nothing that you do in a classroom which doesn't impact one of these three things. You could think about it for a little bit. You don't have to pause, but you can. If you're giving a mini lesson, you're trying to impact the students' academics. Some sort of content, some sort of skill, some sort of strategy, all fall under the idea of academics. But then again, there's some things that you do in the classroom that very much try to affect the behavior of students. It could either be a negative behavior, an off-task behavior. It could be a positive behavior, for example, promoting on-task behavior. Finally, the last one, it could also be an attitude. You're changing the way that students think or feel about something. Those three big concepts very much come into play with your hypothesis. The reason that they come into play, the reason that they become fairly critical when writing your hypothesis, is that they begin to describe the outcome of your intervention, of your treatment. By the way, the word treatment and intervention, I use those kind of interchangeably, so don't get lost between them. I kind of mean the same thing. A treatment obviously is something that will help, that looks to solve the problem statement, and an intervention is more practical, something that you would actually use in the classroom. So those three things very much describe the outcome of that treatment, of that intervention. I wanted to mention it one more time because I want you to have those three ideas handy as we go through the model for writing a hypothesis. I know. I keep saying that we're going to write the hypothesis, and I never actually get to writing the hypothesis. Don't worry, we're going to get there. I promise. At least I hope we do. Let's talk about the format for what a hypothesis should look like. So the first thing you may or may not notice, depending if you're watching or listening, is that this list that's in front of you is not a bullet point. It's actually a checklist. So a checklist, you kind of have to check off every box in order for it to work, and that's not any different here. These 4 things have to be mentioned in any good, well-formatted hypothesis. So the first one is you gotta state who your population is. Who are we talking about? What grade is it? How old are they? Doesn't necessarily have to be anything very, very specific. But on the other end, the more specific that you can make it, the more legitimate your hypothesis will sound and read. What I always suggest is target the kids the students that you worked with this year. For those of you that are in high school or middle school, you could pick a particular period of the day. So let's say, for example, your second period class on Mondays is algebra. Let's say ninth grade algebra 1. So that would be your target population, and it's pretty fairly specific. So that's check number 1. Check number 2 is you have to mention your proposed intervention. You don't have to talk a lot about it. You have to, though, give it a title. You have to give it a name. You have to define it in some sort of way. Box number 3 is going to mention the content and the measuring tool, which you hope to measure the effect of the intervention. So if you go back a couple slides, the box number 2 is your IV. Your box number 3 is your dependent variable. How are you going to measure this? And then finally, box number 4 is going to be the comparison group. Let's take a look at how this all works in an actual model. Geez, Perez, it took you long enough to get to the model. I swear, guys, there's a method to my madness. I swear. Let's take a look at the actual model that will put the checklist to the test here. I included the research question that kind of spawned the hypothesis. I wanted you to see how one led to another. So let's take a look at the first one, the research question. Will students improve their overall testing scores by receiving a comprehensive and unified testing program? Remember the word by, it is there. After the word by, remember what's supposed to be there? Yeah, that's right. The independent variable is supposed to be there. So let's take a look at how that kind of is distilled into the hypothesis. Third grade students receiving the experimental test preparation program will score higher on ELA standardized examinations than students who receive a traditional program. It's there. It's just proposed in a different fashion. Let's break down the hypothesis further, okay? Let's get colorful here. So on this slide, you have the hypothesis at the top, and then you have the checklist at the very, very bottom. So let's start at the top there. You have the target population, which is third grade students. And then there's the IV. There's the treatment. There is the intervention. I don't know if there's any other synonyms I could use for that, which is the experimental test preparation program. And that is my proposed intervention. Keep in mind, I'm not talking about the intervention. I'm not getting into it. I'm not writing about it. All I'm saying is that it's going to be an experimental test preparation program. Nice, simple, to the point. Go to the next one. ELA standardized examinations. It gives the content and the measuring tool. And then finally, The comparison group for this one are students that receive no such program. And you can see all those little boxes are checked off in one single kind of unified sentence. That sentence, obviously, being your hypothesis. Let's take a look at model número dos. There will be no fancy colors on this slide, but you'll get the message. So the research question is up top. Will a student's reading abilities increase by providing alternative classroom lighting? Let's go through the drill again. After the word by is good. That's right. Your intervention or your treatment. So let's take a look at how that translates into a hypothesis. Students attending a 6th grade class, there's the population, self-contained ELA class, who have a choice of lighting will read more pages in a 30-minute independent reading period as measured by running records, and then the opposite, than students taught with traditional classroom lighting. And there it is. Nice, simple, easy, ready to go. If you'll notice, both the models, the outcome of the alternative lighting and the test preparation program both have academic outcomes. But I could very easily have swapped out a behavioral outcome, meaning that maybe it's not going to be more pages read. Maybe it's going to be better engagement or, a longer engagement. It could be something of an attitudinal measure where you could turn around and say, we'll enjoy independent reading more than students that don't have the traditional lighting. The point is that both hypotheses don't only have to be academic in nature. You could vary it a little bit with a behavioral or a attitudinal outcome. I'm going to go so far as to say that you probably should vary it a little bit, and I'll tell you why. Because the hypotheses are going to be translated into thesis statements, and your thesis statement is going to be what you're trying to prove or disprove, if you put something with behavior and attitude along with the academic, all of a sudden now you have kind of more to write about. You have more material to include within your sections. I keep saying it in every single lecture, but I'll say it again in this slide. It's all about providing yourself with different choices, because there's nothing harder than writing about something that you feel is kind of repetitive and monotonous. If you bring in the behavior and the attitude along with the academics, you have more to go with. That's an option. If you want to do two academic hypotheses with two academic thesis statements, by all means. It's legitimate and it will definitely work. My suggestion, though, is that you're going to mix and match to some degree. All right, let's wrap up this sequence on hypotheses with try it now. So your goal for this try it now is going to be to take those research questions, take the keywords, take the statement of the problem, take everything that we've kind of spoken about that you've been thinking about, and now go ahead and just write it. You have all the tools that you need to write it. Go ahead and put that. Go ahead and put pen to paper, and make it happen. Don't forget your checklist. Make sure that as you're writing it, you're checking off all those boxes. I did include that bullet point there, that second one towards the bottom, to vary your academic behavior and attitude. I didn't have it there until I started talking in the last slide, and then once I realized that that I had included, I figured let me memorialize it in this slide. And whatever you do here with your two hypotheses, you're going to cut and paste right into your section 1. Speaking of section number 1, it is high time that we get to the format for your assignment number 1. Let's take a look. One of the things that I've discovered over the years is that students in your position do far better with these types of assignments if they're given a very specific way of doing them. And even though there is a lot of room for individuality and individual flavor and individual flair to some degree within your different thesis projects, because we are writing an academic paper, there has to be that certain uniformity and that ability to kind of flow and deliver the information of your thesis in some sort of recognizable pattern. So the general formatting notes that I'm going to present to you today are my way of helping you get to where you want to get to. And even though there will be a very specific format, which I'm going to show you in just a slide or two, there will be room within that template for your own individuality. But for now, having these subheadings that I'm going to show you are going to help you kind of begin to chunk the paper into smaller parts. Sometimes for young researchers, it's very hard to look at a part of a thesis, and look at a 10, 12 page paper and begin to visualize how it's going to look and how it's going to all play out and unfold. The subheadings that are a part of these formatting notes are going to do that for you. In that mode, bullet point number 3. These subheadings are not suggestions. They are a template, and I would like for you to follow them as closely as you can. The only amendment to that is going to be in that last bullet point, where even though I do give you the subheadings, if you want to change the label of those subheadings and call it something else, by all means, knock yourself out. I don't mind you doing that as long as the content inside those subheadings remains consistent with what I'm going to tell you now. So welcome to your first subheading of section 1 of your thesis. As you can see at the very, very top, I labeled subheading number 1 as the introduction. One note, please do not call the subheading 1, subheading 2, subheading 3. I try to provide labels for you. If you want to change those labels at any point in time, go ahead and feel free. May not necessarily be here because an introduction is just an introduction, but you may find later on in your writing that you do want to vary the labels. By all means, if you want to have that academic pursuit, you're more than welcome to it. Just please don't call it subheading number 1 as part of it. So the first 1 to 2 paragraphs of your thesis is going to be kind of like a global introduction. Your textbook suggests, and I happen to agree with it, that you use kind of a creative approach here, something that a writer would call the hook, trying to bring in the reader into what it is that you're going to be exploring, and get them involved in the process to some degree. It could be something funny, it could be something serious, something powerful, something lighthearted. Whatever you do choose, I would like for it to have a very direct link at the end of those 1 to 2 paragraphs to your actual research. So you make it very, very explicit why you've brought up this creative approach or this creative story. And how it relates to your research. If you notice at the bottom in red, I try to give you some idea of how long your writing should be in each individual subheading. That is obviously just a suggestion. There are going to be parts in your thesis where you're going to perhaps want to stretch your legs a little bit and write a little bit more than what's suggested by me. And then there's other parts where you should probably stay pretty close to the suggested material. In this case, for this particular subheading, the introduction, try to stay to 1 to 2 paragraphs. Okay, let's take a look at number 2. This is going to, subheading number 2 is going to encompass your topic and statement of the problem. It's also kind of like the first taste of the reader. It's the first taste that the reader is going to get of your research. So you're going to want to set the stage for the researcher as much as you can. A part of setting the stage is going to be that you're going to highlight some of those problems which are the root of your problem statement. As part of those key problems, you're going to start now bringing in some of those key words and phrases that you've kind of heard about through the course of the past couple of lectures, and you're going to be about at a page for this particular type of writing. If you remember to all the try it nows that you've seen so far, I'm going to go out on a limb and say that if you've tried all the try it nows, you will have about somewhere between 60 to 75% of this page kind of like written for you. Maybe if not written in actual words, but if you did the try it nows and you kind of are going to cut and paste some of those ideas from the try it nows, you could already start to see how the work becomes a little bit easier. If you didn't do the try it nows, it's fine as well. You're going to be delivering the statement of the problem in a narrative form in order to showcase to the reader what are some of the ideas that we're going to explore in this particular thesis. A student a couple semesters ago says, "Hey Perez, it's like writing it's like watching a trailer, like a movie trailer, where you're going to give some of the ideas of what's in that movie, but you're not really going to give anything away." And I was like, yeah, that's kind of it. You're going to present the problem in the movie, but you're not going to talk about how the problem is solved just yet. All you're talking about is the problem. I didn't go back, but I think I showed you this slide already previously, so I'm not going to talk about it. But if you remember to earlier in the lecture, I like to give these little writing points or little question points that you could write off of. In case you kind of get stuck during your writing, you could always come back to this and explore some of the ideas within here. And it kind of gives you like a little quick reference sheet, should you need it at the time. Awesome, we are zipping along here. So far you have your introduction, your kind of creative little introduction there. Then you have a good statement of the problem, so we all know what's at stake here. And the next one, subheading number 3, is actually quite an easy one. Your research questions and your hypotheses. So the research questions, if you did the try it now, all you're going to do is cut and paste those research questions right in here. You're going to be aiming for 4 to 6 research questions. If you have more, that's awesome. If you have less, we'll take a look at it. But your goal is 4 to 6 research questions. Remember, those are giving you options of where your field of study is going to lie. In this and then you have your hypotheses. Don't worry about your hypotheses right this second. We'll start lecture number 3 with writing those 2 hypotheses. So you'll have that coming up soon. In this particular subheading, there is no narrative. It's just bullet points. Some people feel a little uncomfortable with that, and if you do want to write a little introductory paragraph, you can go ahead and do that. But if you don't want to, you don't need to. It's just simply no narrative, just bullet points with your research questions, and then another little subheading for hypotheses. Subheading number 4 is going to be a subheading that's titled the need for research. This is a little bit of a tricky one, so I do want to spend just a minute or two talking about it here on this slide. Let's take a look at the slide itself first, and then maybe I could provide a little bit of further commentary on it. So The need for research section is a place where you, the writer, is going to very much establish the importance of your work, the importance of what it is that you would like to do with your research. Look at the question in bullet point number 2, because I think by answering it, it kind of will take you a little further down the path of what's to be expected from this subheading. If you're able to solve the problem statement, which you all have by now, hopefully, what would be the possible advantages and eventualities for your classroom? Meaning, if I'm able to take away that problem, and to some degree that's going to be your effort in section 2 and 3, is to prove that you can take away this problem. So if you were to take it away and you look towards the future, what would the advantages and the eventualities be for your classroom? Think about it like this: your observations, your personal observations, the research that you've perhaps collected in the past, even soundly conceptualized constructs, even things that kind of make sense. That's the type of importance that you need to bring here. One word of caution: the natural inclination for this subheading will be to go back to the problem and rehash the problem. And a lot of students, for some reason, overlap subheading number 4, this one, with subheading number 2. Subheading number 2 goes backwards and examines the problem as it was. Subheading number 4, this one, looks to the future and says, if I could solve these problems, if my intervention into this problem is successful, these are the benefits and the outcomes that we can expect. The reason I say this is a little bit of a harder subheading is because in many ways the other subheadings are very scripted, meaning that I'm going point by point, and if you're following along and listening to lecture, I very much do micromanage the bits and pieces of the other subheadings. I micromanage because I care, not because you're going to listen to every single word that I say, but because it's there if you need it. With this particular subheading, it's not necessarily a skill. It's more a thought process of thinking critically about the solutions that you're going to be coming up with as you go forward. 1 to 2 pages. I think that's a fairly good number. Surprisingly enough, for some of you, that might not be enough. I noticed that some students do tend to write quite a bit in this particular subheading, but 1 to 2 pages seems like a reasonable amount for you to establish that importance. Once again, here, that little cliff note page, just to avoid any type of friction that may occur should you get stuck in writing. It's here for you. You know, it's kind of funny. I was working in a Google Classroom this morning with a couple of kids that were doing a writing piece. And one of the things that I had posted yesterday was almost like something like this, almost like guiding questions that they could fall back on as they were writing their essay for their homeroom teacher. It's amazing. Once you do it, once you fall into routine of a way of teaching and a style of teaching and a paradigm of how you teach, it happens over and over again. I mean, you guys are at one of the highest levels of education in this country, and still a page like this could very well be fairly useful to you. So it works for third graders, works for master's students. So I'm not going to spend too much time on this slide at all. No, not because it's easy, but because it's going to require a little more time than I have in this lecture. So just to get a couple of quick ideas out there, so you have this in mind. You are going to have to go and find 5 articles. They're going to be cited in scholarly articles. As part of finding the articles, you're also going to have to synthesize the information. You're also going to have to synthesize the information that's being presented within the article, and eventually connect it to your own research. Yeah, in lecture number 3, I mean, it's almost exclusively dedicated. There's some other things in there, but it's almost exclusively dedicated to finding, reading, synthesizing research articles. So by all means, stay tuned. I don't want to waste any more of your time here. If I'm already going to spend an hour plus talking about it in the next one, so I'll leave it at that. It will be about 3+ pages. I don't exactly know how long it will take you. You have 5 articles, and if each article takes you about 2 paragraphs to write, so you have about 10 paragraphs. It's about 3 pages or so. It's not a terrible lot amount of writing, but it's kind of hard when it's 82 degrees and beautiful outside. So yeah, there is that. We'll talk more about it next time. This slide will serve as a cautionary tale for those of you that are endeavoring to complete section number 1 here. The format which I just gave you, it is going to reduce a lot of the friction that is associated with this type of writing. However, these things take time. Academic writing just takes a lot of time. It just is what it is. Time is not our friend in this particular class and in this particular semester, especially with spring coming up towards the end. So you must begin writing sooner rather than later. I have more about that at the very, very end, but please hear it once. You're going to hear it again. You'll probably hear it 100 times from me. Begin the process for yourself. Little steps, little chunks is a lot easier than cramming it all into one weekend. Let's go to our last slide here. Wrap it up, Perez. Wrap it up. We have arrived at the golden slide of clarity. I don't know, I never called it that before, but as I was writing it, it seemed to just come out, and I kind of like the way it sounds, so we'll leave it there. The golden slide of clarity. It is our last slide for the night, so that's exciting. Let's talk about some of the things that you could do right now, este momento. So as of now, you have the ability to write subheadings 1 through 4, which is kind of nice because you can get started. You can kind of get started on this process right away. It is my intention for next lecture, and hopefully it's already up when you're listening to this, and it's already there waiting for you. For you to have lecture number 3 in order to get to the information that you need to write that last subheading number 5. But as of now, with this lecture, you can 1, the introduction, 2, the problem statement, 3, your research questions, and 4, your need for research. So you have all the information that you need for that. Just requires pen to paper at this point. And I need it in a file that I could read it on Microsoft Word, and you will send it to davidperez11230@AOL.com. All right, ladies and gents, I hope we have all arrived at a self-actualized place, and I am ready to call it quits for the day. I will see you in the next lecture. Bye-bye now.